Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Global Studio. My name is Kristen Kornienko, and I'm the coordinator of the collaboration that is the Global Studio. Today is going to be a student-led session on the future of design education. We have a Miro board that's part of this session, and I have put the link in the chat along with the password. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm privileged to look out at a beautiful lake on lands formerly known as the Salish region of Turtle Island, today known as Interior British Columbia within the political boundaries of Canada. I'd like to acknowledge that I am a fifth-generation white settler, now living and working as an uninvited guest on the lands of the Secwepemc Nation, and that I benefit from intergenerational wealth of land ownership. I'm a squatter on these lands, and yet our current system does not criminalize me for that squatting. The region was not negotiated by treaty and remains to this day unceded. Immediately around where I stay, this includes the people of the Splacheen, the Sconleth, and Squilax bands. Cooksjam, or thank you. A Splacheen band council member described the Secwepemc traditional lands to me as roughly defined by the Shuswap Lake watershed and occupied since time immemorial by the nation's diverse cultures. There is archaeological evidence that their presence dating back over 15,000 years. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the ancestors and peoples of these bands for their ongoing inclusive activities towards healing and conciliation, and in the defense of the land, water, and creatures of this region, and I commit to this with my own role as a designer, educator, and activist. I also live and work in Igoli, or Johannesburg, South Africa, on veld that is the traditional lands of the San and Sotho-Twana peoples. I learned in the course of my research that significant gold deposits were discovered in both Johannesburg and here within 4 years of each other in the mid-1850s, triggering colonial mechanisms of land appropriation, displacement of communities thousands of years old, cultural assimilation, and resource extraction from the land that continues to this day. I'd also like to acknowledge that in both the regions known as Canada and the US, colonists bought, sold, and enslaved African people to drive this economy. I'd like to hold this space for just a moment to think about and honor the reality of what this land acknowledgement means and challenges us to act on. For me, I find it useful to take 3 deep breaths just as a form of healing. I'd like to, I'm pleased to announce that our last session last week was our first multilingual session, because as we all know, insisting on everything being in English perpetuates the colonialism that we're talking about. And also that we were able to get a small amount of funds to make our website multilingual, so our website is now available in 10 languages. On the website you can find the upcoming events. Today's session is part of a month-long forum series on the future of architecture and architectural education. As something a bit different today, I'd like to start with a poem. It's called the Anthropocene Blues, and it's a bit of a love story to the planet. It's a poem by Anne Waldman. Sound deterritorializes, weather and my love clings to you, sings to you in the new weathers, within a tragedy of the Anthropocene. Nothing not held hostage by the hand of man can we resist. Will we fail to save our world? We dream replicas of ourselves, fragile, broken, robotic thought bubbles. Inside the shadow, a looming possibility this new year to wake up? Could it be? An anthropoid scarred from the forest's slow development, now infantilized, much like us, stressed yet perhaps ready to resist this scenario. The forest made the monkey, and the cave and step, the human, and now what makes us suppler, more human? Climate grief? A fierce tenderness towards a destruction of our world? Questions or actions? My love for you sings for you, world. I've got these Anthropocene blues. And I would just like to say that that's a bit of a gesture to Laura, whose master's thesis defense I attended last week. And one of the reasons that I continue to work in education is that the young people who I work with can be so inspiring, and projects like the one that Laura presented give me hope for the future. So I'd just like to thank Laura and all of you for that. Today's conversation is loosely around the future of architectural education. In this past year of Global Studio, we've heard students' desire to drive innovation and your hunger for real action around social justice and climate change, and what role design can play in these. All of us are seeing the world constantly changing and are grappling with how we will face this change. Today's session runs in parallel with the conversations in session 1 and 4 around architectural practice. Rather than having these conversations in silos, we've put the session's content and resources together on a single Miro board to see what relationships, differences, reflections might emerge. Session 1 is available for on recording. The intent of today is to create a space of mutual relationship, to hear from students what you want, expect, and need from your education based on your diverse experiences, issues raised in the Global Studio events over the past year, your own regional, social, and climate contexts, and importantly, your dreams. I will pass the session to Salam, who will curate today's conversation in collaboration with members of the Advocates for Equitable Design Education from the University of Calgary and Supernatural from Dalhousie. It's become my practice not to ask for bios as a way of introduction. That choice reflects my own need to challenge hierarchies of knowledge, gender, race, and white social constructs. To me, it's a way to think about how the listing of our awards and accomplishments feeds that system of hierarchies. Despite this week's announcement of Francis Carrère's Pritzker Award, we don't yet live in a society in which accomplishments are honored with equity. I leave introductions to the individual and how they wish to be known.
I moved to Canada. I started with studying architectural technology there, as my education unfortunately wasn't that accepted here, because we think that other people's education seemed to be not matter when we move countries. So I had to start all over again. So I started with architectural technology at NATE. And then followed that, I thought architecture technology wasn't enough for me because I always was interested in design. So I studied Bachelor of Science in Architecture through Athabasca University, which was an online education. And comparing to how I studied in person and the online, I found no difference. It was still collaborative, enjoying experience. And back then, when I studied the online architecture, wasn't that accepted either. So that's my second challenge with how to move forward. So as a person who was aiming to become a registered architect and still is, I wanted to see where my education can go. So I applied for different universities to do master's degrees, and I got accepted right away in Germany, Dessau University, and just next to the Bauhaus, which was very interesting. And yeah, I went there 2 years. I studied my master's, and now I came back to Canada because my aim was always to benefit my community here in Canada and help architecture go to the next level. And I always wanted to I have a belief that if I succeed in something, I would like to take others with me to this successful process. So that's why I came back to see where my education can take me, where my um, uh, process and practice will take me. So now I am intern architect here. The journey is still going. I don't know where it will go, but it's a journey full of challenges and gaps and borders and barriers. But the fighter in me doesn't give up, and I hope the fighter in you doesn't give up and you keep going. So that's just a brief introduction on myself. I have my wonderful colleagues here today also from Supernatural and AEBA that they would like to introduce themselves as well before we proceed. Supernatural, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, we can go. I'll take the lead on this, but Laura and Larissa, please feel free to add anything I miss. I know we're kind of a mix of we all have different backgrounds and are going in different directions, but are kind of allied in our journey wherever that goes. I won't talk too much about myself. I'm in the middle of my thesis right now, so I feel like I don't even really know what my life is. But I mean, the three of us we're all students at Dalhousie University, located in Chipuktuk, otherwise known as Halifax, in the beautiful Mi'kma'ki or land of Mi'kma'ki, otherwise known as Nova Scotia. The three of us are, and many other people as well. It's started, Supernatural 3 years ago now, I think. I don't quite remember, but it was in 2019 sometime. And it's gone through many different iterations over that time, with many different kinds of ambitions. And we're really in the moment, I think, reimagining where we want to go, because the old forms that we kind of imagined are needing to change. But that's kind of always been the point, is that it's, we change where we need to. But the group was really imagined or was really started by Luke Stock, a colleague of ours, and Laura Nolte, who's also here, really in response to this frustration we felt as students of a lack of discussion within our education on the realities of the climate crisis and the role that architecture and design plays in that situation. It felt like this kind of elephant in the room that no one was talking about, and we didn't know where to go find the resources to empower ourselves to take on this very daunting future. It just felt like the things that we were learning just didn't feel like they were addressing that. And so this was really a means of getting a bunch of students together to talk about these feelings and turn them into something not necessarily productive, but more positive than just sitting in this pit of despair. So it started with a bunch of students getting together and having conversations, and then started having workshops at our own school and talking with all of these amazing people all over the country, all over the world, and making connections with Athabasca University. And that's taken us in directions that we never really would have imagined a few years ago. And I think that's been, we're realizing just how many things we do have at our disposal, and how much power we do have as individuals, but also how much better it is to do it together, and how many people there are out there doing the work and amazing research and work on the ground. And I don't think we would be anywhere near where we are if we hadn't made those connections. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We don't stay strictly within the architectural sphere. We actually actively try not to. We're really trying to pursue a more interdisciplinary approach, where we look at how architecture can break out of its traditional boundaries of just being about four walls and a roof, and looking at how that can start to really positively interact with all sorts of other kinds of ways of thinking. So Larissa and Laura, feel free to add anything I missed, but that's where we're at now, I think.
I think that was really comprehensive, Adria. I think the only thing that I'll add is like, I think something that we were talking about during our masters is like the difference between problem solving and opportunity seeking. And really like when we shift our perspective towards opportunity seeking, like the crises that we're facing right now provide us like a whole different paradigm of design. Like there's so many different approaches that we can take. And I think when we move beyond like the kind of stress of the moment that we're in and open our eyes to like really the potential that lays in front of us, it's also quite exciting. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Like that was really my experience, like from the thesis that I just completed, was that, there's different portals or thresholds into new ways of seeing the world, and like design can really open those doors.
Yeah, exactly. That being pushed into that like moment of frustration, I think has forced us to look beyond kind of the traditional avenues of architecture that I think we otherwise maybe would have. I mean, I don't think we ever would have fully stuck to them just because of who we are as people, but I think the situation that we're in has forced us to look elsewhere, and that's actually been a really good thing. And I think made us all way more passionate about what it is that we do, and connect with people we probably would have talked to otherwise. So that's all wonderful.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Like seeing a gap and finding a solution, that's what we really need to work on. And I think similarly, AED tried their best on their end as well to find a gap and find a solution or a movement. So would you guys like to speak up on that?
Yeah, of course. I think, Melissa, did you want to start sharing the little introductory?
Yeah, let me stop sharing. Okay. While you're opening that, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that comment you made, Laura, about that right now it is so easy to sort of be negative about or feel depressed about the future, but it also, I think it's extraordinary opportunities. Cracks are opening now and that allow for innovation and change, and that wouldn't necessarily have been there before. And so I think that that's a really great way to frame a lot of the issues that we're facing now. We're not seeing your.
Yeah, so, Sasha, if you can just share your screen, my computer doesn't let me do this many things at once, being on a Zoom call and sharing this. It's frozen, so if you can just pull it up.
We love technology, right?
Yeah, my laptop, it's like, it knows I'm almost done school. And it's just like, it's really, I don't know how I'm going to get through this last month with it, but
I had a teacher who told me once your computer has a sensor inside your computer that tells you how stressed you are. And the more it sends more stress of you, the less it works. So try not to be stressed, and the smoother it gets. So
I think that's one of the silver linings of COVID, is it's taught us all to be a little more compassionate about presentation hiccups.
yeah.
okay, you can go ahead, Sasha.
Hey, hold on. Let me just get this up. Okay. Sorry, now my computer's kind of getting a little slow. Hold on a second here. Sorry about that. Oh, I think we're seeing Melissa's screen now.
Yeah, I just meant you can go ahead and.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we would like to start our introduction by acknowledging that AEDE is an organization based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. We acknowledge that we are on Treaty 7 territory, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. This land is also home to the Métis Nation, and yeah, we are very thankful to be able to live, work, and learn on this land. So my name is Sasha Simic, and I'm joined by my colleague, Melissa Amadeo. We are part of the Advocates for Equitable Design Education, which is a student collective from the University of Calgary School of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape. AEDE is dedicated to the advancement of critical pedagogy and design and recovery of dialogues that are usually minimized in current design practices. And we started this organization in the wake of Black Lives Matter, which started in the summer of 2020. And we have run numerous workshops and events since then. We believe that the practice of design is not inert, nor does it occur in a vacuum. Issues of Socio-spatial discrimination cannot be disentangled from architectural and planning exercises, and understanding the nuanced intersections between design, economy, politics, society, and ecology are integral to a sensitive and informed approach to environmental design. So in order to contend with the problematic legacy of design, we thought it was critical to cultivate a generation of practitioners who are knowledgeable, empathetic, and passionate advocates for a more just future. And yeah, we just wanted to end off our little bio by saying that if anybody has any questions about starting their own student collective at their faculty or would like to be involved with AEDE, we are more than happy to speak to you, so please reach out. We truly believe in the power of student collectives in creating change and having those important discussions. So we were always looking for new ways for the group to transform and grow. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So as we see, like with going towards future education and connection into architecture, we see there are some boundaries and gaps that we're trying to solve or connect or find solutions for, or find a different way in achieving better education. So with that movement, we thought maybe we can open this platform here for you to speak freely, discuss what comes to your mind, what you feel, and don't feel afraid to share what you're feeling, because problem solving comes with knowing what is the problem first. So as the facilitator of this session, I would like to encourage you all to share your experience and let us know how can we help you. So to start off with this session and talking about gaps and boundaries, we would like you to do this quick icebreaker exercise through Menti. So let me share my screen here quickly. All right. So could you please pull your phone and scan the barcode, and or either go to www.menti.com and enter the code. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do it, and then I'll tell you what needs to be done. So this tool, Veronica introduced me to it, and I found it really, really interesting. And I went to another event the other day, and we used it on a professional level. So I thought including this is very helpful, very engaging. Cool. So now, once you access Menti, you will find this question right here. It says, what words come to your mind describing boundaries, challenges, or gaps, which were or are a potential limitation in your academic experience? So please take 5 minutes, put as much words as you can, or as much words as describe those, and then we will see the words coming up here and populating on the screen. Have colonial legacy, gender inequities, racial inequities, knowledge, hierarchies, tradition, lack of diversity. So those challenges could be anything that limits you from moving forward or making your current experience harder. Yeah. Once you write the words, you need to hit submit, I think, and then it will populate on the screen here. Like also when we talk about equity, diversity, we really need to understand what they mean when we're talking about them. So hierarchies too. Who is giving knowledge to who, or is it a collaborative way to talk about things? I think we need a little bit more explanation on what meant by tradition. Is it like the way things being done and continued, or
that was mine. I just
Yeah.
feel like there's like these really like deep rooted grooves in architectural education, and a lot of that revolves around studio culture and like the history of architecture, which might be like important in some ways, but I think it can also be really limiting and hold us back from experimenting or like trying new ways of even practice or research, which is
yeah, it's like you feel like the answer is always, oh, that's how we always have done it, and that's the right way to do it, right?
And there's this idea of like what an architect is, and there's this like stereotype, and you know, I can see like people like trying to live up to that too, and you know, I think we have to break ideas of like what that means, because we can re-architect the architect in a sense.
Yeah. Cool. And then we have lacking of practice knowledge, lacking of critical dialogue, lack of mentorship, what else here? Lack of exposure. Cool. 2 more minutes. Very wonderful and very connected. Rigid curriculum we have here. You guys touching on most of the elements we would like to discuss today, so that's really helping with this.
I just added Brian Lee's the Black New Deal studio that he's teaching at the Harvard School of Design, which looks at challenging power structures that use architecture and design as tools of oppression, because I think that it's interestingly engages with a lot of these topics, and he's doing some really interesting work and really emphasizing how a lot of these issues you can draw a line to the power structures and how that informs the way architecture is being practiced.
Yeah, there's lots of resources on Miro board. I hope will be helpful for you to see. Awesome, this is really becoming interesting there. We have lack of diversity duplicated. We see the size is bigger. Let me see here. We have, we talked about that, family perception. That's a cool one to understand. Yeah.
I
So
agree. I'm curious about that one
yeah,
as well.
yeah. And social background, limited climate literacy. What else? Location. Awesome. So family perception. That's very interesting. Would someone explain what they mean by family perception?
That
Is
was me. It is, there is, growing up in Northern Alberta, trying to break out of the oil and gas ideologies. The way my family looks at architects, either they are out of my educational, oh my goodness, words.
experience.
Yeah. And like when we have a family friend who is an architect and you're not going to find a job. And I know a lot of that thought process, or that those thoughts are vocalized to me quite often. Yeah, I'll never be able to find a job. There isn't a basis for Northern Alberta having architects, and yeah, that's kind of where that came from.
That's very interesting. You know, I think also when you mentioned, like someone else mentioned culture, I think also depends on how culture perceives certain jobs as well. I come from a culture that thinks that everyone should be either a doctor or engineer, and architects come under the engineering thing. So when you see the diverse thinking with people's background and how people think, okay, certain jobs are the way to go, whereas if you think about it, each job has really its potential to make other job grow as well. So you can't be an architect without knowing construction, for example. And when you talk about construction, you're talking about multiple trades that come together to put the building together. So if you're really underestimating what each career is or what they do, then we really underestimating what hard work went into and knowledge put into reaching that level. So this is a very interesting point. Thank you for pointing that out. Awesome.
Can I just add something to that?
Sure.
That just made me think.
Sure.
I think it's also that kind of perception, I think, shows a failure of the profession or whatever being able to create like the perception of the profession as something that it's I think purposely kind of gate kept and made to be this like very mysterious thing, and nobody really knows what an architect does. And that's, I think, in the traditional sense, like something that people value about the profession, but I actually think it holds it back because nobody really knows what we do, and they only think that we do one thing.
True.
And it's I think it can be incredibly limiting on like how many different kinds of problem solving and like different kinds of jobs that architects can fill, because like we're very good at understanding really complex systems, and like we can, ideally, if we or maybe train more in this, like work with communities to help solve problems. And it's I think it's been maintained as this very mysterious profession on purpose. I think that really does it a disservice and really discourages like good people from going in and trying to be architects, because they think it can be only one thing, or certain institutions make sure that you only think it's one thing. Right?
Yeah. Also, maybe also being underpaid as architects. But when you think about architects, you need to think not only as an architect. When you're designing, you're thinking about people. So you become a psychologist, and somehow you're thinking about how you can integrate the mechanical system, electrical system, structural system. So you're an engineer in there. When you talk about how can you integrate nature, so you have the landscape components, you need to have a knowledge on that. When you want to think about how people move in a space, so then you're talking about circulation and traffic and everything. So we have multiple diverse angles of looking at things, and people think we're just draw things. So that's the underestimation of our capabilities and knowledge, because we don't just think, oh, this looks cool, let's just build this. No, there's a thinking process, a collaboration between different individuals with different background, different thinking patterns put into to create a project. So any more comments on these topics?
I had a bit of one to chime in on that, and it's I find, especially bringing it back to this idea of family perception, where it's what an architect does isn't always quite like as tangible. Like there's a lot of kind of like working and figuring out and problem solving, which isn't always is part of the process, but some people kind of look at that as like something that people don't always fully understand, and like it's kind of, there's a lack of appreciation for it as well. Whereas you think of like a doctor or an engineer or a nurse, like it's, you go to work, you do this. Whereas an architect, there is kind of a bit of like trying and figuring out, which sometimes I find from families or people who don't have architects or creatives in their families sometimes struggle to understand about the architectural system.
Yeah. There is not one specific solution for the problem. There are multiples, and it depends on what direction you're going. So, yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Since we started the discussion, let me move to the next question, and that will direct us more on how we want to proceed. So let me just see. There. So which of the following topics would you like to start? And I think someone already started the poll. So we have 6 topics that we would like to start talking about. The urgency of environmental issues in the architecture education, the connection between school and practice and the transition in between them, the accessibility of learning architecture, being able to have access to the resources and being there for everyone's needs based on their skill level, knowledge level, personality, background. Then we have the change to studio culture instead of having the burnout studio culture that you need to be not sleeping in order to proceed. Then we have the urgency around pedagogy and licensing. How do we learn architecture? How do we get licensed? And then the act of mentorship, how important mentorship is in this system. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about what would you like to discuss, and we'll go from there. So if we choose one, not necessarily means that we will stick to that one. It's one topic that will flow to the next and to the next. And you will notice from the discussion that we will be touching on most of the elements here. The items equal. Oh. It's getting harder. We need someone to break this. Oh, there we go.
This is rather fun to watch.
I know. Okay. See, one more minute, see if everyone voted. Interesting change to studio culture. Everyone seems to be enjoying not sleeping. Environmental discussions. We've been talking a lot about it. So
I see people, some people have chosen the act of mentorship.
Mentorship.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask if Veronica is going to be leading the mentorship mixer. And Veronica, maybe you could just say a few words about that at some point before you leave today, just to get people excited about joining us for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I can just take a minute right now, if that's okay, Kristen.
Sure,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
So we're going to be on April 21st, I believe is the date we set for it. We're going to still just work out the timing. We're going to host almost like a speed dating event. But the purpose of the event is to make connections between, young interns, young professionals, or people just entering into the practice of architecture, connecting with others in the industry. I think one of the challenges that we face today is that a lot of our knowledge in architecture and our gained experiences is through mentorship. And we might not always find the type of mentors that we feel connected to in our communities or our networks. And so building a network of mentors and that you can kind of lean on throughout your profession is really important. I'll just share that I have many mentors actually, and I think that they come into people's lives at different points and different kind of moments that you're looking at. And some of the mentors that I had back when I was a student, I still connect to on a regular basis, just to get some advice on where I'm going and my kind of journey in architecture. So the event is going to really be an opportunity to allow people to connect with each other, and hopefully it's one of many. So watch out for the invitation, and encourage everyone to join us.
And Veronica, is that something, are you thinking that we'll have a conversation at that event around sort of the changing needs in mentorship and what students would like to see in a mentor, and sort of who is a mentor, and the idea of kind of broadening, like you and I have talked about the idea of broadening the pool of mentors across disciplines. And is that something you expect to happen at that event, or would you like people to email us or contact us in some other way of with sort of what they'd like to see, so that becomes part of the event?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people actually here were part of a focus group session that we had a couple of months ago to talk about what it is that we're seeking in terms of mentorship. So all of those thoughts that everyone shared in that session is feeding into developing the event. But I think what might be helpful is maybe to set up a shared board, like a Miro board, where people can share their further thoughts. Because I would love for this not to just be a one-off event. I would like it to be continuous development and a network. So I'm looking at some other programs like WonderMe and other things that can allow people to connect more fluidly when the events are not happening, like in between events. And hopefully we can continue to share our ideas of what it is that we're needing, and hopefully we can help facilitate those connections. So it's a good point, Kristen. I think that maybe if we can create a board so that people can share their thoughts, we can continuously be active in pulling that information and developing for the next events that we host.
Okay, maybe we can, there is a page on our Global Studio website of collaborations. It's a collection of different Miro boards. In fact, this Miro board today is on there. Maybe we could post one, but let everyone know we're posting a Miro board there around mentorship, and then there's a button that just immediately takes you to the Miro board. So that would be a good way to set that up.
That'd be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and as an intern and as a person who moved a lot between schools, different practices, and trying to move forward in the career, I see the importance of mentorship big time. Either within school itself, if you can find someone who you can open up to, and then they can help you and direct you in your career path, in your education path. And if you're working, and what direction you would like to move with your architecture career as well. Because when we talk about architecture, as you mentioned, it's not one way of doing things. There's multiple ways, there's multiple types of projects. So it depends on what your passion is, right? And finding the right mentor who could share their experiences with you, and a mentorship that is about collaboration, not about telling you what to do, is very important. And I think with that, we ask maybe, would you guys like to share what does it mean when we say mentorship to you in terms of education or career? I think with the tie we had, I think we have chosen to continue with mentorship now, and then we'll see how the discussion move forward between the different topics. So I'm opening the floor for everyone to discuss what is mentorship for them, what it means, how they think it's important. And if you're not willing to speak here, we have on the Miro board sticky notes under mentorship, and then you can add your points there as well. So anyone would like to go? Anyone would like to discuss mentorship importance for them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying that I'm just about to finish my Master's of Architecture degree, and so I'm just about to dive into the world of being an intern architect and going through that whole process of having to have like a mentor in order to, become a licensed architect. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a mentor, especially like somebody who you can definitely identify with, who you might be able to like see yourself as in 10 years. Maybe I'll mention this simply because a lot of this panel is made up of women, but one thing that I would definitely encourage people to find is, if you're a woman and you want to become an architect, definitely connect yourself with other women who are also architects. And I know that as somebody who I want to be a mother someday, I have no idea how to navigate the ability to become a licensed architect and be a mother. Like, I know taking long leaves of absences like maternity leave can like really freak people out. They might think that their career is over. So I don't know. I've tried to connect myself with female architects who are also mothers, so that in the case that I'm eventually going to be in that position where I want to go and be a mother, that I have people who can kind of help me guide or help guide me in the right direction, how to navigate like situations that can sometimes not be so great for your career, as sad as that is to say. So yeah, definitely try and find mentors who you see yourself being in 10 years. So
Yeah. And when you're trying to connect to those female architects with that background, because I know we've discussed this with Veronica before too, this is like a limitation too, of what you want to proceed. But when you were trying to connect with female architects, did you think that they were open to share their experiences? Because some mentorship is about also opening up. So do you think they were open for those discussions?
for sure, like I feel like people who have gone through, okay, I'm just using the example of people who went through the experience of being mothers and architects, but it can really be any situation. It can be if you want to go to a certain country, or you know what I mean? Like, I'm just using like my own personal experience. But yeah, definitely, like, I've personally found that people are so willing to speak to you and so willing to like share their story and how they kind of navigated that. But I definitely did notice that as soon as you want like a little bit more of a collaborative experience in terms of mentorship, mentorship like takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of attention. And so I feel like people are initially very forthcoming, but if you start asking for a little too much, like it can get like a little dicey in terms of like how to navigate that relationship. Like it's one thing to like go for coffee with a mentor like once a month or something like that, but it's different to like actually ask somebody who isn't your intern appointed mentor to, you know, sit down with you like on a weekly basis or something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely very challenging. It's just like how to ask for knowledge without crossing lines too, right? If you're not too close to the person. So that gets a little bit challenging. And also like, I think now we can also connect to the licensing process here in Canada. If you want to become an architect, you do need a mentor. And the mentor has to be an architect, registered architect within your own province. So that's also a limitation, right? If you are trying to find a different architect or connect with someone else, or not even an architect, maybe the mentorship you need is not from an architect. How would you go with that, right? So
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that's, I put on a sticky note there, interdisciplinary mentorship. And I
yeah,
think this goes for within school and once you're in the field, because we try to tackle so many issues in architecture, yet we only seek architectural mentors, which doesn't really make sense to me. If we're trying to do community outreach or work with communities, we should be bringing on individuals, sociologists, people to help us and mentor us through that process. And I know the field is changing and that's starting definitely to happen. But I think as interns, we should have mentors like that in our registration process too, and not just an architect.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
can I jump in there?
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah, anytime,
I'm
anyone can
so
jump in.
passionate about this interdisciplinary conversation. It's like, you know, it's one thing to say also that like we should be open to like other types of mentors, but from my experience in school, like it's not so straightforward, like it's not so easy. And I think like one of my mentors is an oceanographer, and my thesis would not have been what it is without his perspective. And it was an incredibly valuable experience, but it's also like when you're crossing disciplines, it's like an act of translation. It's like being able to speak different languages. And so I think, yeah, I definitely agree that it's like an important conversation, but I know like many of my classmates are doing like interdisciplinary theses as well. And yet there's no roadmap or path for like making those connections, even within the same school. So I think like having more conversations about that would be really important, because yeah, I think like often we have this conversation about like broadening our horizons, but like what are the actual steps that it takes to make those connections and to work within different realms?
Exactly. And especially in design school, it's such an issue because we're taking on these huge topics that sometimes maybe we shouldn't be, because we're not getting the proper mentorship. And like I don't know, I think Sasha and I have seen it a lot, projects around Indigenous design, but there is no elder helping or like giving insight, or there's no mentorship. And I think and your intention obviously is never to do anything wrong, or kind of, I don't think the intentions is okay, but I think in the end we need mentors to really help us understand what we're trying to do, or it's just watered down into something that actually might make the issue worse sometimes.
Yeah, especially when we start doing, or like when you're navigating sort of like Indigenous relations, and like at what point does that knowledge become extractive? Like, where do we draw the line? Like, I feel like there needs to be more conversations about that too, you know, like what relationships that, you know, just the many nuances of relationships. It's never black and white.
Exactly.
Definitely. And like
yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Salam.
No, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. It just makes me think I'm will be done my master's in in June, and I'm been thinking how excited I am this summer to like go be a real person, and how I feel like due to school being so busy and so like it can just get so busy that it just totally encompasses your whole life. And I feel like I have never been so entrenched in such a small group before. And I feel like I need to like take active steps to like introduce myself to people who aren't architects, because when school is your life, you end up talking to like a lot of people who are just in your field. And I feel like so many people that I know in the city that I live in are just architects. And I am going to have to now go now once I've done school, go actively try to make relationships outside of my profession, because I haven't really been introduced to anybody else in school. I mean, I have some relationships, but like it can be like it has to be an active effort as a student to like go outside of your outside of kind of the realms of your focus in school. And I really wish it wasn't that hard. Like I wish I was only able to take an elective outside of my faculty this past year, which and I've been here for 4 years. Like, I mean, that's a little unique to our program, but yeah, like I want to be interacting with other people. I want to have take courses with people who then could become mentors. Like that's what school should be for. And I feel like I'm having to now go teach myself how to talk to people who aren't architects for the first time in 4 years, and that feels kind of sad.
Yeah, there is no connection in between, right? And then it comes to the question someone wrote, how to reach out to a mentor too, right? Because eventually, like people who you will be talking to, even if they are not named mentors, they are mentoring you somehow based on their experience. You're learning from them. And then also the question is like, what is the relationship between you and your mentor? Is it like a person who just gives you the information and you deal with it? Or is it a collaboration of knowledge in between? You share, they share, and a question like of that. So do you guys think that the way we are learning now, if we shift to the pedagogy, we're learning architecture, is it helping in moving forward of understanding what you need to proceed as an architect, or how the experience itself? To explain this a little bit, like in normal settings, and normal I mean is what is been used to as a tradition, as Laura said. We have the teacher in front of you, or the professor in front of you, giving you the information, and then you as students supposed to be absorbing all those information. So do you think that we have a collaborative way of learning, or would you like to see more of that? What would be suggestions on that manner? How would you like to proceed with this type of education-wise? Those questions scratch your head. Maybe you never thought about them before, but this is the platform to speak up if you would like to share.
I just want to talk about, we just at Dalhousie, we do something called Professional Practice Week. If in the wintertime, it's just like we all have to take a professional practice course. They just like squish it all into a week, and all the different years take it at the same time. And they had some really interesting speakers this year that were talking about the first 5 years of practice or outside of school or whatever. But a lot of they had some people with maybe like kind of unorthodox practices, and it was really great to have some conversations about the internship process with a few of them, and how that could be potentially opened up to have opportunities to like, or like questioning like what is it, like that process is kind of defines like what like an architect should be. And it was interesting talking about like, well, what if the internship process like required you to go to work at a nonprofit, or like you could have an opportunity to like go work with a community group for like points or hours or something. Like I think I was just thinking about all the opportunities there are with that kind of process to like broaden what a good architect is beyond just like knowing the code and being able to like be well versed in all these different aspects of like project delivery. But like, you know, like it shouldn't being an architect also mean like you're a good person who like interacts with your community and is able to like talk to people outside of the profession. And I mean, I know this is kind of talking about what we were just talking about, but it's thinking about opportunities within within school to broaden what it is that makes us a good architect beyond just being good designers. I'm in a class right now where you can get like an extra credit, like if you organize a group or an event that has to do, I'm in like a social justice class, and you get extra credit if you plan an event based on social justice, or you like volunteer with a community organization. So if you could like swap out an assignment for going to do that instead. And I wish we had more opportunities to do that kind of thing, because I think that's I think when you get out into like the real world, you realize just how valuable it is to be able to be immersed in your community and problem solve with other people beyond just your own capabilities.
Yeah, I want to comment on that too. Yeah. That professional practice week was the most inspiring week for me. Like, I wish we could share it with everyone. I have like a very sort of atypical alternative practice. Like, I've mostly been in research, and that professional practice week made me want to become a licensed architect. It was so, and I think one thing that stood out to me about it was like this part didn't make me want to go through licensure, but like everyone was sharing. It was like the theme was the first 5 years after you graduate. And everyone was sharing about how challenging the licensure was and how stressful it was. So we go from school, which is totally idealistic, like there's no financial limitations to our projects. Like the sky is the limit. We can create anything, into like an incredibly like rigorous, I mean, I've never done the internship process, so I don't know, but from what they said, like one person called it soul sucking or something, like that it was that he actually set up like a year-long kind of like process for himself, where every week he was like doing these different creative activities to help kind of retain that that idealism and that inspiration from school throughout the internship process. But yeah, I don't know. I totally agree with what you're saying, Adria. Like it shouldn't be soul sucking. Like it should be invigorating. Like we're entering into this practice that has a lot of potential, and how can we make that energizing?
Yeah, and I think the being able to kind of think beyond certain constraints in schools, I think is a really good thing. But I feel like that kind of gets positioned as naive, that like, oh, you're just a student, so you like don't know how to work in the real world because you're like not thinking about these kinds of constraints. But I think that's also like those are the things that get people really excited about being in the profession. And I think it's really sad that you like get to kind of be encouraged to kind of be imaginative in school, but then it's almost like this like trap door waiting for you when you go out, where they're like, psych, it's actually going to suck now because we're not like they don't there aren't things built into that process that maintain that excitement and inspire people to think outside the box and like create a kind of practice that is exciting and fulfilling. It's just like, okay, you had your fun in school and now here's the reality, where I don't think it necessarily needs to be that way. Like I think it trains people to think that practice can only exist in one way, and aren't encouraged to go out and think about other ways that it could be done.
Yeah.
And yeah, that ties really nicely back to the idea of mentorship, because I think it's like there's no doubt that like it's going to take a long time to change architectural pedagogy and licensing, but there are people within the field that is working from within and doing amazing things as licensed architects and intern architects. And I think being connected with these people and gaining mentorship from them is so important for students, because up until like a year ago, I did not know about like half the things I could actually do once I'm an architect, or like during my license, my internship. So I think having these conversations with people and trying to kind of subvert and change from within is really valuable. I was having a discussion with a mentor I have at a firm I was working for last year. And I've been kind of going through this crisis in my head that I don't know if I want to jump into interning hours right away, because right now I'm just like so involved with these kind of discussions, and it's just what I really want to continue to do. And the firm has this social impact team, and I'm like, I would love to work with them, but I would not be getting my hours. And they focus on accessibility. And I'm like, how can I be like in my internship process and get hours for doing wall sections, but I can't get hours to knowing the correct heights for people in wheelchairs for sinks and stuff. I'm like, I don't understand how I can't get hours for that, and that's not something as valuable to the field. And I think like like what my mentor said to me, it's just like slow down your hours so you can work with us at the same time. Yes, it's not great that you're not getting hours, but you'll get paid and you'll be able to kind of tie it in with what you're doing for when you're getting your hours. So you can kind of create a bridge between them yourself, even though that's not what's typically done in the field. So I think having those mentors to help you understand how you can connect these things is so, so crucial, because there are ways. It's hard, but there are some ways.
Yeah, that's very interesting to think about. Yeah, like now we're talking about also preparing between school and transition between school and practice. And what makes you a good architect? Is it only if you know how to draw, or if you know how to present, or if you know how to sell your project? So is that what makes you a good architect, or is it the architecture that talks to people and touch them and help them move forward, right? It's like, are you designing for your ego, or are you designing for the people? So which way you want to go for, right? It's like, I had a discussion with another architect, and we're trying to design something for a minority group. And then we wanted the architecture to create a simple for those people. And then as we're moving forward with the challenges of, for say, budgeting and vision and structural engineers, they try to remove a little bit of the complexity of the design you're trying to design, but at the same time they're trying if that changes, you're under the challenge, like how can you keep the building still represent the people you're trying to design for? So, and then it came the questions like, is it your ego that you don't want to change, or is it you're designing for the community and the building exactly what you want because of the community? How when you're in school you have these free wings, you're flying, you're doing whatever you want, and then the minute you start in practice they tell you, oh, we can't do this, oh, we can't do that, oh, it's amazing idea, but no, you can't do it, either because of budget or restrictions or time limitations. So how can we connect that gap between the practice and the education, and then how we connect it with the goal we're aiming as an architect or architects? We're not designing for ourselves, we're designing for communities, right? So how do we move forward with that?
I don't know, maybe I can share like a piece of advice that I got from, she wasn't a mentor, but definitely somebody that I talked to at my old internship. So this architect that I worked with, she spoke a lot about how difficult it is. So this is kind of going back to what Melissa was saying about like trying to create change from within, because it's hard enough to like, try and make change like from the outside going in. So it's usually easiest to do it on the inside. And I don't know, it was kind of like a sobering conversation to hear that the architect I was speaking to, she said that she like nobody wanted to listen to her in terms of like how to bring more equitable design ideas into her work at her last job. Like she didn't want, like nothing was really working. Nobody wanted to come to her workshops. And it was only once she became a really amazing project manager and really knowing like a lot of like the technical skills that and could really like do her job really well, that people started to like listen to what she had to say. And it was kind of like really sad that to know that you have to be really, really, really efficient and good at your job and be like so like you can only begin those conversations once you've convinced everybody around you that you're like a great architect and a great project manager. So I don't know, like maybe this is like a sobering thing to think about, but also, I don't know, maybe it is a way to kind of make change from the inside, is like work your way up and create change as like one of the project managers or the higher ups in a company. So I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer, because it's like how do you penetrate the fortress? So
Yeah. Veronica?
Sorry, I lost my earbud at the exact same time. I think that this is a really important conversation. There's a lot of important comments here. I think what is being experienced and being noticed is the inequity in the profession. And, once, you kind of hit a 10-year mark, you see a great drop in decline of, let's say women in architecture, because there is these inequities that exist. So I feel we have to work on these inequities from the inside out, and we need to, have pay equity. We have to have gender equity, and it's true that as a woman, as an architect, you have to be twice as good as your job in order to even be heard. Sometimes that's not always the case, but a lot of the times it is like that, and that's part of the reason why you see a decline of women in the profession after the 10-year mark, because that's the point where you should be leading jobs, you should be leading practices perhaps, and you should be kind of in those leadership positions at that point. So where do we go from there? I think we have to continue to mentor each other and continue to break that bias in the profession, to allow for people to feel comfortable to, be of different genders, different races, different perspectives and cultural backgrounds, and be leaders. And also to, Sasha, I was really kind of taken back by your comment about, your discussion about this dialogue between having children and being a woman and being an architect. And I've actually heard that before from other students, that they didn't think as a woman they could have all of that. And I would say that you should be allowed to have everything that you want. So we have to continue to support each other. And I think through mentorship, we can make a change. And so I have to head off now, but I just wanted to invite anyone who would like to further conversation on mentorship. I'm always available to chat. Everyone knows I love to chat, so feel free to reach out if you ever want to have a conversation about that.
Thank you, Veronica. I really appreciate this.
Yeah,
Thanks so much, Veronica.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for sharing. It's really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica.
Douglas?
Yes, I also wanted to just build on what Sasha said, because I sometimes wonder if we're actually got the right emphasis in our architectural schools. What you said about project management is actually absolutely positively true, but it's also one of the things that we don't really teach in architecture school, and yet it may well be the most valuable skill that we come up with, because I notice that if you can manage a building project, you can pretty well manage anything. And so this is kind of really important. We stress studio in our architecture schools, but is that the right idea? And part of the what this does is it creates numerous problems down the line. We talked about, the economics of architecture, and here's a profession that still occupies a very high rank in terms of all the construction hierarchies, and there's no doubt about it, it is a hierarchical system still, and yet we are the most poorly paid of all the professionals involved in buildings, and that's our own fault. We don't really understand the business of the profession, whereas other people, engineers seem to understand it, the trades seem to understand it. We simply don't. And it's even gets to the point where, sadly, even being able to read a spreadsheet is actually a really valuable skill. So we may be emphasizing the wrong things in architecture school. And that's one thing that I find very interesting. We tend to focus on design, of course, and we all love design. But what I've seen over the years is as we've neglected the other areas, it sometimes seems to me that we've only become like decorators for developers. And as that trend continues, it's going to be very, very bad for the profession.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know this, like, talking about project management and construction management, like, isn't the like most exciting thing to talk about, but yeah, like I was really surprised that at least in my own architectural education, like we get a professional practice seminar that's like 1 week and everything is crammed into that. And, going through internships, I didn't really know anything about construction contracts. Like I didn't know anything of that. And I don't know, I really felt like I could have focused a lot more on the things I wanted to talk about if I was already armed with the knowledge that, like, about project management, about construction management. If I was armed with that knowledge, even if it's like the most boring class in the world, if you're armed with knowledge, you can go on and talk about the things that you want to talk about, because at the end of the day, like, your boss really wants you to be able to be good and efficient at your job. And so it's only once I felt like once you could be knowledgeable and good at your job that you could actually start to talk about the things that you wanted to talk about.
I don't know if, Veronica, are you still with us? I see your picture, but have you?
Sorry, yeah, I just, as long as yeah, I'm hanging around for a couple more minutes.
Could you maybe describe to people the project you're working on with Richard Dixon? Because it seems to be like a really interesting way of addressing what Sasha just said.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we're working with the School of Business on a virtual co-op. And what it is that it puts the learner into a number of scenarios where you're having this exchange with an AI that mimics exchanges that happen in real life. And so it allows you to go through this exchange in a way that, you're building up your confidence to address certain issues, and you're also kind of allowed to make mistakes and not feel kind of bad for making those mistakes. It's part of the learning process. So this one with Richard that we're working on right now is addressing biases in construction management, which is a position that architects are often put into, not to say that they're managing construction, but they're often in a relationship with a contractor under design build scenario or a construction management scenario, where you have to navigate all of these different players and their biases and their even their temperaments. So there's also certain characters and identities to these characters and how they behave that mimic real life. And so you're put in this kind of exchange to go back and forth to build up your skills on how to navigate difficult characters, difficult situations, and understand that. So this one specifically relating on construction management, and it's looking at what happens when you are working through a project. The project is like a school project. You're designing a school for community. There's a set of shared values that have been established. However, through the process, the budget has gotten kind of started to strip down the project. It started to make changes. Schedule is also an impact. Products not being delivered on time, being changed during construction. How do you manage all of that in a way that you can continue to have your shared value and have a successful project in the end? So it's a very interesting component, and I agree that project management is really important. You got to manage not only the expectations of the project, the budget, the schedule, but also you have to manage people, and there's a lot of different characters of people out there and you have to be able to kind of really facilitate and lead projects as an architect. And that takes a lot of practice and skill to do. And I think it's through experience that we really learn how to do that as well. So this virtual co-op gives you a step in to kind of to try out those experiences.
Very interesting.
Really cool. Yeah. I wish we had a class that did something like that, like go through different scenarios, and that's really interesting.
The scenarios not only kind of focus on the real aspects of managing a project, but there are also things like discrimination against different cultures, gender discriminations, and how do you react to that when you're placed in a position where someone is discrediting you, perhaps because you're a woman or of a different race, and how do you react to that, and how do you manage to be heard when you're put in that kind of situation? So
yeah, definitely. I find so, like, as a minority person with so many minority aspects, not only that I look different, or I have a headscarf on my head, or I come from certain areas. There's lots of, I think people think that it's a joke if you make a comment about other cultures without actually understanding what you mean by them. Like, for example, I was in a position of someone made a joke that someone received a scammer email, and another person commented, "Oh, is there money in that? I'll take it," right? And then the other person responded, "Yeah, there is money, unless you want to send it to your lost cousin in the Middle East." So as a person who comes from the Middle East, I raised a point just very calmly. I'm like, "Why the Middle East?" Right? And then the person response was like, "Oh, that's where all the scammers come from." I'm like, I get scammer calls from Canada all the time. Why do we want to do this faulty generalization of things about people? Like, if you don't know the culture and the background of people, and if you don't do your own research of what certain culture is or certain background is, you can't really just make it as a joke and have fun with how or where people are coming from, or without understanding at least your colleagues or at least the people you deal with. So you always have to do your homework, because not necessarily that the news gives you all the information. So understanding, yeah, you can say that you're a diverse community or a diverse experience, but without really understanding what diversity is, you can't really say it. So another person told me about their friend's experience. She worked with a construction company for 20 years. She was sitting in a certain position and a certain desk close to the window, and everything is great. They hire a new person from a minority group, and then without any heads up, they go to this lady and they tell her, "Oh, we're giving him your spot because we want to show that we're diverse." And I'm like, how is this about diversity? Okay, good for them for seeing that he's different, but also you're neglecting a person who's been with you for 20 years, who's also maybe a minority and working hard. So addressing diversity doesn't mean that you put one person ahead of another. It's how do you do a collaboration between all the different backgrounds. So it's very interesting of how we hear about people, how they define their use of diversity word in their practices and education. Yeah.
It's also a testament to just how much skill and tact and energy it takes to be able to handle a situation where something's happening or at someone else or something or to you, and to be able to find a way to like A, not be mad and B, like explain it to someone in a way that they'll understand and they'll not be mad, like and have they're just not and have it not be like become an altercation. It's like within a professional setting, it's like I think it's not appreciated just how much skill and effort that takes to like defend yourself or someone else in a setting, and like have to be mindful of someone else's feelings when they've done something mean or like or and it may not have been out of malice, but it's just especially in like in a work setting, it's like those are not easy situations to navigate, and you need to have a lot of like saved up energy in order to handle them. And sometimes you just don't, and it kind of sucks when you're in a situation where like you just don't have it in you to bring it up, but you know you're the only person in the room, or you feel like you're the only person in the room that if you don't bring it up, it just won't get talked about. And that's it's a hard situation to be in when you don't want to leave it unaddressed, but
it's up to you. It's up to you to actually talk to the person in very calm way. It's nothing personal. You're just trying to teach them that, okay, you might think it's funny, but it's not funny, right?
And it's hard. And even despite your best efforts, sometimes it just doesn't go well, no matter what. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when you're trying to be like it. Like if you're in a personal situation, might be different, but when like you're at a work setting, for example, like you can't maybe act how you maybe otherwise would, and it takes it's unfortunate how often so many people have to like take energy out of their personal, like their precious personal stores in order to like talk to someone about something when it shouldn't be your job to do it. That's why it's hard when you're like one of the few people in an office setting who's like, you know, a minority or something. The work often falls on you to correct other people, or if someone has a question, they'll just come to you, and you're like, that's cool, but also I'm not like an encyclopedia, like I got work to do too. Like it's a tricky one.
It's like you need to learn how to communicate your ideas without being disrespectful too, right? Because maybe they think nothing wrong with it, not until you explain to them, well, this situation is not accepted because of 1, 2, 3, and you have to be very calm, very patient, and reading their faces as you're telling them the information, right? So, and I think with that, we can move on to like practice versus school. What do you think that school can provide you further to help you in your practice career?
Can I just jump in for a second before I just wanted to say, this is a screenshot from a course I took on anti-Black racism in Canada. And one of the interesting things that she brings up is the need for companies to prioritize the type of education so that it doesn't put people in the positions you're talking about. It shouldn't be up to you to have conversations, not you specifically, but it shouldn't be up to the people who often are the minorities and already dealing with a lot of stuff. It shouldn't be up to them to also deal with, you know, addressing the work culture. And so in your office. And so I think that can be something really important as well, is sort of talking to people in offices about the fact that needs to be made a priority, and it has to be actually authentic, not just like, you know, a lot of firms, they market themselves very well as, you know, very diverse, and but as this slide says, actually, what does diversity and inclusion mean? And is it actually, do people feel that way who actually work in the office? you know, and so I think that's a really important thing as far as practice as well. And I also just wanted to add, I was trying to find an article I read a few years ago by the director of the Bartlett School of Architecture, which for the last while has been ranked as the top architecture school in the world, for whatever that means. But it was a really interesting article about how we still so emphasize the trajectory in architecture that of licensure. And that there are so many other things that an architectural education prepares people to do really well in other disciplines than to follow the trajectory of licensure. And I think that that is something also that really needs to be talked about more, because I really believe that. I believe an architectural education is just an amazing education and can prepare you for so many things. And I think there's a lot of pressure on people that they follow the trajectory to get licensed.
Yeah.
And so I think that could be something interesting to think about further as well.
I just want to jump in there, Kristen, because I think that's like a really vital conversation that's coming to the forefront right now. Like I recently attended a panel with Keel Mo about the future of architecture, and he addressed that same issue that, you know, there's so many opportunities for architecture graduates, and to think that there's like only like a single kind of trajectory is limiting. And also the reverse of that, if we're not needing to be accredited, like if every architecture school didn't need to be accredited, like what opportunities would that provide in terms of a design education? It would blow everything open, because suddenly there's no limitations, or there's no criteria that need to be met. So yeah, I think that's a really important conversation right now.
I do as well. I mean, I chose not to go through the trajectory of getting licensed, and I do just totally different things. And it's also interesting, the biases that you bump up against when you aren't licensed, and the sort of that somehow you're not as, you know, doing work that's as important or as valuable if you're not licensed. And I think that is something that really needs to be sort of set aside as well.
Yeah, and I'm not like, I mean, you know, I don't really care about titles, and titles are overrated, but even the fact, like, if you're not licensed, you can't call yourself an architect. So you're not like able to even associate, like if you've, you know, gone through the schooling and but you've maybe gone a different direction, like you're not allowed to associate yourself with the profession, like you're something else. And so it just really limits what architecture can be, or like what architects can be, because you have to be called, like, you know, you have to be given a different name because you decided to find another alternate route that worked better for you. And I think that's unfortunate sometimes. Or like even the fact that, you know, if you get your hours, but then you decide you don't want to, you're waiting to get licensed, you know, like you're stuck as being called an intern, which is like quite like I think is kind of demeaning on purpose. Like it's to like encourage you to get licensed, so that way you get the title. Like they make the title such a big thing.
Yeah.
And otherwise you're like stuck as like, oh, you know, you're an intern, so therefore you don't know anything, which is not true. Or you can't call yourself an architect, so therefore you don't know anything, and that's just so not true.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're aware now, they also put a limit on how many years you can be an intern. So yeah, I don't know the number off my head, but they have put a limit. I think it's 10 years. After that, you have to move forward with other things.
It is very unfortunate. Over the decades, we've wrapped the profession in more and more bureaucracy to the point where it really does. I'm not sure it's in the best interest of anybody. For example, when I started out with the OAA, there was just 2 exams, one called Group 1, which was a multiple choice, and Group 2, which was a take-home exam. When I went down to California, we had to take 12 exams, and that included a 12-hour marathon where you came in at 8 o'clock in the morning and you had to actually design a building by 8 p.m. that evening, all drawn by hand in those days. And at the same time, we see as North America becomes more and more kind of constrained, in other parts of the world, like in the Netherlands, you have your master's degree and you are an architect.
An architect, yeah.
So there's really an inconsistency around the world. And even you might even question why the whole concept, I mean, given you spend 4 years, or let's say 4 years undergrad, a couple of years master's program, 6 years of education, but then you have maybe 50 years or more of a career, and we don't really have a good program for continuing education. You would almost think that the development of a professional would be a continuous process of learning, and that you could enter and leave the process at any point. But we're not that flexible. We want to put everything into these smart little compartments, and it's not like that. And even accreditation has become more and more of an onerous process for the schools, to the point in which they've all, because they have to fulfill all these requirements, they all start to be very, very similar. And we don't really have really radically different approaches across the country because of the accreditation process. So sorry, I just wanted to, I really do think we have tied ourselves up in knots, and how we're going to resolve that, I don't know. As Vivian Manask once said to me, well, many of us who only did 1 or 2 exams seem to have done just fine in the profession. Is this really necessary? So it may be a process that really does need to be re-examined.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally relate to that one, as I'm still waiting for my education to be certified from Germany to here. It's been almost 6 months in the process, and I still didn't hear anything from the accreditation board and the certification board. But it was interesting for me, because within the process, they asked me to provide them with a letter that my education in Germany allows me to practice architecture in Germany. So I was afraid of what the university there will provide me with. And once I received the letter and I read it, I'm like, you can practice architecture not only in Germany, but in Europe, anywhere in Europe. And within 3 years, you can become fully registered. So at the beginning, you're not registered, you still have the practice, but after the 3 years, you're registered. And here I am, I'm still fighting and waiting until I get that piece of paper that tells me the number that I can input to become an official intern. So, and until you're an official intern, you cannot calculate any of your hours. So you're losing that timeline too, right? So that's limitation and gap in how the licensing process, and we're waiting for people to tell us if we can proceed with our lives or not, right? And is there a better way we can implement to make the process smoother, right? Not only for like architects in Canada, but people coming from different countries, people having different backgrounds and knowledge. And not only for architects, I feel like this process is for many people who try to study something a little bit different than what we know now, right? It's the little challenge of having a little bit more experience with something else. You don't feel that much appreciation.
Is there any kind of program in the country that is like a fast, because I know a lot of people who get education elsewhere and then have to start over like you did. Is there a start of any kind of program that allows people to come and take a year and then they can just start practicing? If you have education or license somewhere else, is there any option?
I think if you have 7 years of experience in a different country, then you apply as a foreign architect. But you still have to go, you still have to go through the same process of seeing if you can practice here or not. You still do the paperwork, you still might be asked to add more schooling into that. So it's very limited, very limited.
And you're just in this limbo period where you're just waiting for people to deem whether you're good enough or not. You're just waiting.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah,
we actually
good.
there is this broadly experienced foreign architecture program which is been all set up and for to address that problem. What we often at Athabasca are sent people who are referred from the CACB, the Canadian Architectural Certification Board, to us to take, for example, our professional practice course. Or in another instance, they actually wanted the architect to take one of our studios. So it's a very it is still an onerous process, though.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up too on what the conversation around continuing education, because I think one of the other things that's a little bit disturbing that I've become aware of coordinating the global studio, because one of the things I really think is a strong point for the project is that we've developed relationships with the professional organizations across Canada and across South Africa, because they're our biggest other collaborator. And when, as an example, when we give most of our lectures, they give continuing education points. And so we can give out the certificates for that. And last week, when I sent out the message or a couple of weeks ago for the session last week on the future of education titled Decolonization and Decarbonization, not a single architectural organization across Canada or across South Africa would give professional practice points for that session with that title. So effectively, they also are controlling where people's continuing education interests go by the parameters with which they use to decide what has value as continuing education and what doesn't.
Yeah. So now we're 2 hours into the discussion. So, very interesting. I know we touched mostly on 2 elements, but we also talked about the other aspects a little bit forward. So the question is like, do we want to continue, or would that be a future discussion?
I also just wanted to note that Wanoa has put a comment in the chat just to call everyone's attention to that, because it's an interesting comment about having an electrical trade ticket and then coming into architecture. And I don't know if Wanoa, you'd like to say anything further about that, or?
Architectural trade ticket.
No, I'm a journeyman electrician so I come from a family of trades, and I was curious if there was going to be any value having that ticket. So I knew there was going to be a certain amount of value, but also having that experience of being on job sites where I've been running a crew and like seeing the process of a building being from the beginning to the very end, and if there was going to be any value in that. And so that conversation that you guys had was really enlightening, and really, yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting point. I like working from my work experience, because I have been working in multiple firms. I can tell you, if you're continuing to become an architect on the traditional way, your background knowledge with electrical will be a huge help for you, because you will have that extra step of understanding the extra component of coordination process, right? So it's not, for sure, it's not knowledge that's going to be going to waste, knowing that knowledge, because between the different disciplines of architecture and engineering, we work collaboratively to have the final design at the end, right? And if we don't have that collaboration, then the building will not be as it should be. So you knowing electrical background really helpful with that, because you will know how certain things put together, how but if you know it really good, you also know how can you make the space a comfort zone for people using the space, so you can take it even to the next level if you like to. So that's my point of view. Cool.
We only have, I know we focused a lot on 2 topics, but I feel like a lot of the stuff we talked about is kind of a mix of everything on this list. Like,
Yeah.
I know we didn't talk about environmental issues not so much, or like so explicitly, but I feel like so much of the thinking and talking that we've done is applied to, like whether or not learning about that in school has been validated, or even what Kristen just said about whether learning about that, like the barriers to learning about that within, as a professional, like, that not being able to count as continuing education hours, like it's, that has to do with accessibility as well. It's these are all highly connected topics. Like if you talk about one, it's hard to not have that then bleed into all these other themes.
Definitely. And then you will have access to the Miro board, so you can feel free to go in and add any extra comments you have on any aspects, or if you have any additional topic you would like to hear more about, also will be a place for you to describe there. Yeah.
Well, and maybe if everyone's interested in, a couple months, we could schedule another student discussion session, because I think there's been a lot of valuable things talked about today. And I put here on the mentorship about community as well as mentorship, and that's something in my professional experience is just really critically important, is that you kind of really nurture a community of people around you who have who are thinking about, some of the same things you are, and because that's, we all need that as we move forward. And I think particularly if you're doing things outside the norms, I think particularly as we've heard today, if women have certain struggles in the profession, that it's really helpful to have a community around you. And so I, this could be an example of one community we have, of being able to get together and discuss these issues. So if you guys would be interested in doing that, please feel free to get in touch with me, and that would be no problem to schedule something again.
Yeah, I think that could have some value. It's also, I think a good reminder that like a community can also be a mentor. Like it's not just individuals, it's not just a one-on-one relationship, where even just being in groups like this where, we're all like-minded in certain ways, but I think we're all able to, even over this conversation today, all of you have taken something that I think about a lot, but expanded upon that in a way that I wouldn't have ever thought about on my own. And that's really valuable. Yeah. So that's why I like come to these kinds of conversations with Basket's a good group of people. I always leave learning something new. Don't feel quite so alone.
Yeah, I think such a change up from school, where we're just like, this is the problem, this is the solution. We don't have many chats about it. And I love these kind of open-ended conversations where ideas are flowing, and we're not trying to find a solution. We're just like really just trying to find alternative like modes of design. And I think it's so valuable, and something that people don't think is as valuable as it is, but I've learned so much over this last year of doing these events. So I'm always happy to do it.
Same with what, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was just about to say, like, yeah, just like what Melissa was saying before, yeah, like I feel like sometimes you can be in an echo chamber in your own head, and like all of these things that we've spoken about today, and in a lot of the other Global Studio events, there are a lot of things that you kind of just end up ruminating in your own brain, and you don't realize that a lot of other people are having like the same thoughts and they're having the same issues. And so it's definitely like a great, like big step forward to be able to just like talk about it and realize that, yeah, you're not alone in thinking these things. So.
And you know, that's absolutely correct. I never really benefited from mentorship, so perhaps my comments are a little bit misguided. But what I did see was that I learned more from my friends, my community of practice, than I really. I hate that this is going to sound bad, but I think I learned more from my friends in architecture school than I did from the professors. And building a community of practice, in addition to having good mentors, is something that will sustain you throughout your entire career. The people I met at university, I still I still do things with them all the time, as both friends and professionals. So it's building a community of practice like the one we're kind of building online is really, really essential.
I totally agree, and I think it can be so fulfilling. And as an example, many of you have heard Seychava's talks, and he and I have had a friendship for close to 15 years now, and and finally now we're working on our first design project together, which we've been saying we want to do for years. But it's just so, we both often comment on how comforting it is to know that you have people out there that just sort of really get what you're trying to do with design and how design is manifesting, in your career, in your life. Because architecture is one of these, I don't know if it's rare, maybe I just think it's rare because it's what I live in, but it bleeds into your personal life. I don't know how it cannot as a designer. And so I think we often do have friends as architects that are also designers, and there's a real richness to that, I think. So I think there's great value in it.
Yeah, I had a professor once who told me, Salam, even if you're eating rice, you're designing the plate because you're moving the rice in a certain way. Yeah.
Yes,
awesome.
Go ahead.
Nothing. I just wanted to say awesome discussion, really beneficial, opening mind to a lot of things, and it's good to know that there are people willing to hear your story, and to be able to open up and say what you've been through. It's very beneficial, and I think that's part of mentorship. Again, not naming mentorship, but also having the feeling that you have a space, a safe space to collaborate and share. Very beneficial. Thank you, guys.
I agree. That's really well said. Thank you, Salam, and thank you everyone for coming today and for talking about these issues and sharing, because I think there's real added value when people are willing to share their own personal experiences, and because we all feel vulnerable doing that. And so I want to thank you all for just taking the courage to do that as well.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Always a pleasure.
So much for this conversation.
Also, Sasha, thank you for writing down a lot of the things that we're talking about in the Miro board. I would get distracted, so thank you for keeping track.
I do the same thing, and I'd find myself thinking about something and realizing that you guys were talking about something else, and I wasn't doing my job of moving the Miro board to follow the conversation. So
you were enjoying, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I said to Douglas yesterday, I always so enjoy my interactions with all of you guys. So thank you for that.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you very much.
It is a wonderful, being able, the sessions that we've been having of late, have been very, very powerful, I think, and encouraging in terms of really trying to listen to what students are talking about and what their concerns are. And today was no exception. So again, thank you very much, Salam, for moderating, and to everybody for participating, and to Kristen for organizing this. These really do help us as we move forward, and we try and really re-examine the whole nature of this beast. I know Kristen mentioned the Bartlett School, and it is a phenomenal place, you know. It really is. It's quite magical. But I went there a couple of years ago before the pandemic, and I was talking to the director, and she said to me, you know, we were talking about the cost of architectural education, and she readily admitted that she would never be able to afford to send her children to the Bartlett School. And you go,
Wow.
well, wait, there's something dramatically wrong here if this is what we've done, that we can't, that good people can't get into the best schools because it's too expensive. And this is something we have to all be, you know, very concerned about as we move forward. I would say, you know, I hate to always be focusing on economic issues, but unless we address some of the economic issues of architecture, whether it's affordable housing or the actual economics of climate change, we're never going to be able to make any real difference. And
Yeah.
it's very sad in that respect, but these kinds of conversations today are very important so that people start to, you know, talk about some of those issues.
Why do we need to rank architecture schools to create the status of students going there? That's a bias within itself, right? It's just like, oh, you see it on the resume, this person from this university, by the way, oh, that's an awesome university, the student must be a great person. And sometimes it's not the case, but we have that stereotyping in our head saying, okay, if they are coming from certain places, that makes them good people. But that's it.
Yeah. Well, I even picked up there was a big volume about architectural education it was a very beautiful book, and it had all the different schools. But, and I bought it because I want to really find out where the real innovation is happening. But again and again, it was, we're going to bring superstars in to run our studios, and that's basically what we do. And you go, that's it? I mean, that's all you got? It's really fascinating to me that the whole nature of education around the world is so fragmented, siloed, and the concept of, we were talking about artificial intelligence earlier. It's great if Athabasca does it. That's very nice. But why aren't we sharing these things? It's nothing to share an AI-based experience with all of the schools of architecture, but we don't do that. And there's very little sharing, and a lot of it means that we have incredible redundancy. Like, we know that students, for example, have struggle with structures courses, and yet we do nothing to work together to make the kind of interactive multimedia that might make it easier to understand. And I find that it's sad. There's little or no cooperation around the world or across the country.
I'm just putting in the resources. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I just received yesterday, because I signed up for the National Film Board's monthly newsletter, and this month they have a playlist on housing experiences in Canada, and it focuses on housing insecurity, gentrification, and urban planning. And there's some really interesting looking films. I watched a couple of the short films. They're everything from short films to feature length films. But it's an interesting resource, because housing, not only, because what made me think of it suddenly, Douglas, is when you say that about Bartlett, but not only do you have to pay for Bartlett, but you have to pay to live in London. And in Canada now, I mean, that stops a lot of people from being able to go to many of the architecture schools, because they're all in cities like, Toronto and Vancouver, where what you pay to live is often more than what you pay to go to school.
Yeah. It's tragic that you basically take your tuition, if you're going to a city like Toronto or Vancouver, whatever you're paying in tuition is going to be doubled for the 8 months that you need to find room and board to live in those cities. And again,
Yeah.
I really, for us, the pandemic is really, I mean, in the ideal system of architectural education, you could dip in and dip out whenever you want. You enter or you leave as you feel appropriate. If you have to work for 6 months to afford the next level, then you can do that. But wouldn't it be great if you could take, if it was there was a lighting course at the Bartlett that you wanted to take, that you could do that and take a mechanical course for the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, or if you wanted to do the AI experience at Athabasca, that all of those things you could put together your own education. In fact, there was a fascinating, and actually I always we wanted to get her to come and speak, a woman in the United Kingdom who couldn't afford to go to a master's program. So she started approaching architecture firms and said, well, what would be the equivalent, like if I to do a master's, but I'm going to do it on my own. I'm not sure where she got in the process, but it was an absolutely, it really opened my eyes, because you go, okay, she's right. Why should we have to be so regulated in terms of how we learn to be an architect? Why aren't there more alternative pathways? And how could we build those?
Yeah.
And I think too, the opportunity to take courses in other disciplines and be able to bring them into architecture, I think would be really interesting to look at as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Kristen and Douglas, it's near 4:30 where we are, so I'm going to have to sign off. But this was a lovely conversation. Thank you for inviting us. It's nice to chat with all of you.
Well, we'll look forward to doing it again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
everybody, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.